Hello and welcome to Dom and Me. Uh, I'm Shotty or Brendan, but that's not what's important here. What's important here is Dom. Hello, Dom.
Hello.
So
How's it
you
going?
you brought a topic today. What
Yeah.
what is that?
I'm here to spill all the secrets of academia. Um, which is why I assume people can see this. I assume
Yes,
you didn't just do this for your own
no, yeah,
entertainment.
that would be funny.
Yeah, I've come I've come here, under the condition of anonymity, so I don't get taken out by the academic Illuminati.
Yeah. Um, so before we jump into it, just to contextualize, um, yeah, I said before we start recording, this is sort of a weird contextualization because you and I ostensibly don't know each other that well. We've known each other for like a year now. We met because a mutual friend that you were doing trivia with was streaming Ocarina of Time while I watched, and I was giving him trivia answers, and then I started playing trivia with you guys. And then trivia went back to the real world, and now we just am in your guys' friend Discord.
Right. You're in what is at this what at the time was a very large and expansive Discord of just kind of whoever. There are probably 50 people in there at one point.
I think there was more than
What
50.
is yeah, what is now 10 people,
Yeah.
maybe like 7 active participants. The rest of us like very, very close friends from college, and now you're just completely integrated
Yeah,
in.
I made the cut somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the context of how we know or don't know each other, whatever the case may be. Um, yeah, so this will be an interesting one because, like you said, you're here to talk about academia, which is what you do professionally. Um, chemistry, right?
Yeah, I'm a chemistry PhD student.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that is not the world I was in, even even when I was in college. So yeah, this will be interesting. I'm very outside this. It'll be uh, more of a learning thing for me than the last two have
Yeah.
been. So yeah, you mentioned like talking about like the oddities science. I don't know where is a good place to start. Actually, maybe a good place to start is how long have you been in specifically the academia part? Like, because like I assume undergrad isn't considered like the academia part. It's once you get to
Yeah,
graduate
yeah.
school.
I mean, undergrad is, it depends, where you go and even what sort of field you're in and even sort of what micro field you're in. I think can really affect like what part of the, how much of the culture you experience, how much of it you experience at, at what age, sort of. So I guess I probably had more exposure than like most people. I went to like a very big school for undergrad. I was in a lab really early, but you still like, even if you get like a lot of lab responsibility, which, I think I did like as an undergrad, um, you're still just kind of that. You're a lab worker. And I think that's, not the aspect of things I really want to focus on. Um, Sort of what I had in mind to talk about is sort of the weird world of like publishing and, the kind of uh just like I mean in some sense like the human aspect of things that I think goes really unseen, but also like uh sort of like people see when you're always seeing popular articles that are um to the tune of like new study says this, new study says alcohol's good for you, new study says alcohol's bad for you. um and I think that's the way most people interact with science, and I sort of want to get to what goes into that, and the dark side, I guess.
Yeah. So you are you in your how old are we? How
Oh,
does time work? Like what how many years have you been in this part of it now?
yeah. So that's what I forgot to get to in that intro. Yeah, so I'm a fourth year grad student, so I'm ostensibly 1 year away from graduating. Um, I think in the US, they say a PhD takes on average of like 5.6 years in the
Okay.
sciences. So it's really supposed to be 5. Um, but 5 is just sort of where they generally start evaluating if you're going to leave. Um, and so it's more like, yeah, if you've really got that much done in 5, then you leave at 5. But if they feel like there's more stuff to wrap up, you stay.
Okay.
Um, in a more sinister way, maybe, it's if they want you to stay, you stay. Um, because that's sort of the start of what I'm talking about. Is there's really nothing that, or at least at most schools, I think there's really no physical mechanism that stops you from getting held there forever. Um, there's really not a lot of concrete things in place that like decide how long you even do a PhD.
Right, aren't like isn't like I know one of the capstones sometimes for PhD is like a thesis, right? That has to be reviewed and approved. Like could you theoretically just like continually not be approved on your thesis and just be stuck?
Yeah, definitely, but that's probably not even how it would manifest. This is something I really wasn't aware of, even probably until I was like about to go to grad school, or maybe as people from my lab started kind of graduating out when I was an undergrad, some of the grad students finished up. Is by the time you're going to like actually do your thesis defense, um you send it to them before, but there's no like formal approval process until until after you defend usually. So usually it's kind of like you defend, they tell you whether or not you passed, and then you actually go through the process of like you have to deposit it, and they accept the changes you made based on the defense and stuff. But really, the defense by the time you're there is a formality. Like the day of your defense is like not like a nervous day. Really, it's basically like a celebration.
Hmm.
Um, so really, more how it manifests is like whether you've published enough papers usually, and what enough papers is like varies from like professor to professor, lab to lab, field to field. Like even with my like within my own department, like what the number of papers is supposed to be like could vary wildly. Some of that's like the expectations of different professors. Some of that is just like how long different science takes to do, and how fast like things in the field are moving. But yeah, that's more how it would manifest is they can, but there's no real number. There's sort of a number you have in your head, but they could just kind of say, well, it's not enough, and it's like how many will be enough?
Yeah, there's no
Um,
standardized guidelines.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess it would be hard to standardize guidelines, but you would think
Yeah,
there's at least some cursory marker.
yeah,
But yeah, I guess you couldn't really because with some fields like writing a paper becomes far harder. Like things that aren't so much about discovery of something or like concrete observations and stuff. Like it's way harder to write a paper because you can't like there's nothing tangible there. Like I'm imagining like theoretical physics, it's probably harder to write a paper for because you know
yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say that because um browsing through some of like the really high impact journals, like like impact is normally like the term people will use. There's literally like people debate, what's the measure of how good an academic you are, how good a journal is, and like basically there's a couple of numbers that quantify those things, and people debate whether they're the most relevant things, but basically the numbers kind of work out to things that people already kind of qualitatively agree on. Um, so basically, there's a number called impact factor. Um, Basically, that's going to tell you that like Nature and Science, the journals like you've probably heard of, like those are usually like the things that like popular publications are like doing reports on.
Right.
Um, Sometimes like some of the big medical journals and stuff like get reporting like that too, or sometimes like physical journals and like pop science, but um Nature and Science are like in every field like pretty much at the top, like I guess just because they're like the oldest. um and those have impact factors of I don't even know what they are at that point, because like it doesn't matter, everyone is just like that is the top. um but then it trickles down. There's kind of like a orbiter set of journals that's sort of around those. There's like a smattering of just like there's it goes like you'd expect, and there's obviously a high volume of really just dog shit journals. Um but anyways, when you look through, what I was getting to is like when you look through like Nature or Science, you're truly seeing just like such a random assortment of articles.
Right, because
And
there's
there's
so many
definitely
things
like
you could do.
yeah, I mean it's literally just like everything. And I think there's definitely probably a bit of a bias. I don't know if it's the size of the field. Um, chemistry, physics, material science, biology, biochemistry, like there's just tons and tons of grad students, like tons and tons of manpower like getting thrown at these things. It's like partially funding, like you need lots of those people to like teach undergrad courses, like whereas you don't need as many like TAs for like psychology. Although I mean I guess psychology is a really big field too. Um but obviously I think there tends to be definitely a little bit of a bias towards like the physical sciences in those journals. But you will see stuff that, I did this recently. It's like I'm just like looking for new stuff there. And it's like, yeah, there's like some stuff um about like chemistry and physics and stuff that's like relevant to me in the physical sciences. But then there's just stuff that's like um you know testing like the thing about how like your friends have more friends than you, or like um trying to think of another example, just like stuff about like, oh, the shape of bird wings. And in fact, I wonder if I just like do a random search.
Yeah, so it is a thing I find interesting because like you could in like the nature field, right? You could like study one species of bug for like 3 years and like
Mhm.
follow what they do, their impact on the ecosystem, and like that sounds to most people that probably sounds dull and like why would you do this? But that's useful information. Knowing the impact of a bug on the ecosystem and on its local ecosystem and the ecosystem at large is like super valuable information. It just like sounds dull as fuck to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you describe pretty much any like research topic. They write these like fancy articles that are trying to like distill it down to, the sort of summary articles that try to distill it down to like things that normal people would like care about. But at the end of the day, it's like really the even the very like high impact articles like people are working on, um, when you really look at the specific things they did, typically it is still so small, like in the course of like a normal person's mind, I would say. Um yeah, actually, and I just browsed through it. It really is wild like what a bias there is towards the physical sciences.
Well,
Um
yeah, that's what most people are going to like at least mentally see as an impact. Like,
Yeah. But there definitely is. I mean, I was hoping to find like a funny article title or something because they really tend to stick out. I think, social sciences and stuff really tends to stick out in sort of these lists of just like recent publications in the big journal.
yeah.
Um, but yeah.
I had another sort of introductory question before we get into the nitty gritty of it. So you're getting your PhD. Is academia
Hmm.
like is you being in academia just a means to the end of getting the PhD, something you have to do for the PhD, or are you planning to pursue chemistry academia like career wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. I, I'm not like totally opposed to um the idea of staying in chemistry. Um, I mean, odds are I'll stay in chemistry in some sense. Um, but in terms of like true academia, in terms of what most people would consider it, which is like becoming, um, like a top like research professor, like no shot. Um, and obviously I meet a lot of people who are all about that, and um I think really a lot of people come seeking that,
Yeah.
but it's like so insane to me to do that. um I think you just have to have like a really specific special brain where that like is all you care about. And I think this is like sort of the fundamental disconnect between like professors and their students is like, of course it's the professor's whole life. Like they basically don't have a choice, but also like to them I think they just like think it's a blast. And then they're employing a bunch of and having very high expectations of people who it's not really their whole thing, in all likelihood. And for some people it is, and some people do want that, but it's like the numbers don't bear that out by default, basically. So no, yeah. I don't want to be a professor for sure. Because it's like, what I always say to people is like, if you're a professor, you get to either have one hobby or you get to have kids.
Just no time outside of one thing.
Yeah, it's very much, well, and you're no longer really a scientist. You're a writer, basically. You're a writer and like a team leader.
Yeah.
Um, who's generally kind of expected to be available at all hours of the day. Um, you sit and try to get more money. Um, you talk to people a lot. Um, yeah, it's a very weird life.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was not a good student by any means. But I had one when I was deciding what I was going to go to college for. Um, I had something that I was really interested in and I was considering doing, but I was like, my only recourse for this, if I do this, is academia, I think. And so as a result, I was like, I'm just not gonna do this. I was thinking about studying mythologies, like in particular, I was like really interested in like Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology and their impacts on you know cultures. I mean, their own culture and cultures far and wide. It's
Yeah.
something I've been fascinated with since I was a kid, and I was like, when I was going to college, I was like, I could do this, and I was like, oh, but then I'm kind of just going to either become a professor or like write papers about this thing that like most people don't care about, and
Right.
maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah, well, there's definitely it's definitely interesting, I guess, like how different I, I mean, depending on who you talk to in like the physical sciences, there are some people who kind of have a desire to um really make sure their work matters. Of course, on paper, like, everyone cares that their work matters, but like, um when you think of academics, you're like, yeah, it's just like a little community of people like analyzing TV shows and books and shit, like, back and forth at each other. Um I mean, surely that's like probably what I would have thought of like academia before I was like really invested in it. Um and I think even in like science, like in physical sciences, like, you still get some of that where it's like sort of just like, your niche community might be just like 10 different groups across the world or something. Or a couple dozen maybe. Um and sure, on paper, to get the grants funded, you have certain things you say you're doing, but it's like, where are you getting that information? Well, you're citing someone else's paper who said that in their introduction. And okay, what's their citation for it? It's like it's someone else's paper where they said it in their introduction. Um and so there's definitely like a bit of an echo chamber even built in there of like, it's just everyone like spitting the same ideas back and forth about like what's important and what's going to solve problems. Um Basically until like the people funding grants or, the editors accepting papers kind of realize like that it's all starting to sound the same. And then I think things slow down a little bit. People have to either, reevaluate and find some new problem, real or fake, or they have to identify a more, realistic problem, I guess.
Yeah, so when we were talking about thesis defense, that's sort of a question that popped into my head is like, how unique are theses really? And I'm sure it varies field to field. Like, I mean, we talked about like, studying a bug, which, not every student's gonna be able to do, but like, there's a lot of animals you could study if that is your field. There's a lot out there, but
Yeah.
like things like, I don't know how much ground is there to tread in material science? Like, how often are new materials that need to be tested in a new way? You know, how often is that coming up? Like, are
I
people
mean,
retreading the same ground for thesis, and that's just okay?
uh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely tend to think even in really like top journals, there's really a lot of redundancy. But not in the sense that everyone's doing like literally the same thing. Um but that for short spurts, a lot of people tend to be working on the same flavor of thing.
Mhm.
Um so like a really specific example is that's like close to what I do is like, people who are interested in catalysis right now tend to be really interested in CO2 reduction. um that you're going to suck up all the CO2 and then not only suck up all the CO2 but make it into something.
Yeah.
That you're going to make fuels, or at least make it something that's, not CO2, but hopefully make it a fuel so you can justify like the money you're spending on catalysts and electricity and whatnot. um and yeah, I mean, that's a real problem, but um uh one paper, and it's a complex problem too, but one paper on that is going to look like, to me it might seem like a big deal. you know it doesn't always, but it might. But I have a feeling if I showed it, like if I showed one to you, even like a new paper that's just out, that's kind of a big deal in that area, and I explained what the impact is to you, you would probably find it incomprehensibly small. um
Well, so that's sort of my question is like, say something does come out that is impactful, right?
Mhm.
Let's take the CO2 example, right? And somebody is catalyzing CO2 and they're making a fuel at like a pretty decent efficiency. Their
Mhm.
thesis worked, they've done it. It's good and can be implemented places. Is everyone else working on a similar thesis just fucked now because that one is done and printed and has been
Yeah.
thought to
Well,
be
so in
good?
terms of your thesis, again, like it's and I've seen this debated actually, because the idea that your thesis doesn't matter is kind of a new school attitude, I think. I think the old school would say, like, yeah, like if someone else like um in terms of papers, people usually call that getting scooped in academia, like basically someone publishes on your topic. I My understanding is like the old school attitude would have been like if your thesis like is really not that novel anymore, like you got scooped on your thesis, like you would like stay longer in grad school and have to like find something um truly new. But I think that's just not the attitude anymore, because I think it's all so publishing focused. And if anything, the bigger problem would be if you were no longer if someone beats you to something, again, like there's so much nuance to this. It's usually kind of like, you know,
Right, your thesis is
if
never
you're
going to be the exact same. It's just in a similar vein, probably.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean people definitely work on really similar stuff sometimes. Um sometimes obviously you always want to be seen kind of a creative whole in the literature, but it's so you know a lot of times everyone's kind of seeing the same thing at the same time because they're all working on the same body of knowledge, like
Yeah,
um
and that's sort of what I meant is like, so to me it makes sense that you would want the thesis to be novel in some way, even if it's a small way. But there's only so much novelty to go around with something, and especially like some fields are going to be way harder. Like if I had gone into
yeah.
academia for mythological studies, like the, it's not like new mythology is coming out, and so a
Yeah.
lot of it has been tread, you know. So
Yeah,
I don't know how they reconcile that.
I think the problem in physical sciences is actually almost similar in that you would say, okay, well, if we're all reading, uh just to use the example I read in my like mythology class, everyone's reading like Ovid's Metamorphoses, like, you know sure, there will be like a community of scholars, but like at the end of the day there can't be that many because we're all reading like the same book.
Hmm.
um I think the problem that happens in like the physical sciences is actually like kind of similar in that um obviously there's a ton of information to the point that there's a big focus in materials right now on machine learning because there's just an unmanageable amount of information both experimentally and computationally. And there's also a big problem of that the way data is reported is not really conducive to computer systems. Um, I'll get back to that part in a second, but um, it's that there'll be these big spurts of topics, partially because of funding cycles. I've noticed it definitely tends to go in maybe 3 to 5 year cycles, which is kind of like the length of grants. Everyone's kind of getting funded on the same topics at the same time. They see a hole in the literature, they all kind of move on to the next one. And it's because everyone is reading the same body of papers at the same time. And obviously, there's like a recency bias. Um, So everyone's kind of reading the papers from the last 2 or 3 years, and they're all saying, like, this is kind of all contributed to this one big problem, but I'm noticing this thing that's missing. And, they're all kind of working on it at the same time. Um, and part of the reason why you kind of have to be working on the same things as everyone else is because, well, who reads your papers? Other people in your field, and they're who peer reviews it, and who, they're going to be the editors in the journals you're submitting to, and they're going to be the people that decide if you get to speak at their conference and if your grants get funded. And so it's almost like this game of like you're trying to appeal to the things that people know while also trying to like kind of sell them that your new idea is also the next big thing.
Yeah, I imagine there's also just like booms. Like I remember in my junior or senior year of high school, one of my friends was like starting to get into material science stuff, and like some new study of graphene had just come out in some
Hmm.
capacity that graphene was going to be good for a thing. And like I have to
Okay.
imagine after that study comes out, then the next cycle is just a lot of people studying that thing. Like everybody reads that and they're like, great, now I will study that thing and fill in that information. And but
Totally. Yeah. I
everyone's doing it.
wish I wish I knew which specific thing you were talking about, because I probably could talk about it. But um there definitely are there definitely huge like boom cycles of different things. And and so the other dimension of this that I kind of wanted to get into, that I think people really don't realize is, while again, like, there's some push towards um double blind review of papers.
Mhm.
um to the best of my knowledge, like 90% of journals, um maybe this is different in medical publishing. I can't speak to a lot, and I think is pretty different. But like, peer review is like never double blind, or even single blind, actually. Or, well, I guess it's single blind. Though you kind of suggest who might be good to review your paper, and you kind of have an idea of who it is. But the people reading your paper know who you are. They know the full author list. Um, and so that kind of creates this situation where, that also historically has like led to a lot of misconduct, where you become famous enough, your papers are just getting kind of tipped in. Um, and while most people are just kind of going to do the right thing, uh, there have been a lot of examples where people haven't done the right thing. And, they just get to this absurd point where they're publishing like multiple like top papers a month. And people literally tend to become suspicious of that just like intrinsically. Um, and hopefully it's like people know to look for it now. I think this was a big problem in like nanoscience. The sort of like nanoscience boom in like the 90s is it's just like the resolution of like microscopes at that point was just such that it's like, well, yeah, you're just kind of looking at a bunch of black dots, and who's to say they didn't just like copy paste one black dot and claim that they made 1,000.
So
you know
it's not a problem of they worry people are like underwriting and taking credit. It's that they think they're just not doing work and are just like fudging stuff.
I mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's so many papers. um there's also like a typical like a typical like published traditional like paper in a journal, because of like literally just like the physical cost of printing paper was 3,500 words, five figures, something like that, and that's all you got. Like, you just kind of had to trust that they did everything right. You know, you say the general way you did it, but you know, you're not saying everything. Um, but now there's also sort of this debate about, you know, digitally published papers have supplementary information.
Mhm.
And usually there is just no constraint to that shit. It could be 100 figures, it could be, you know, like 100,000 words. I think there's probably some practical file size limitation. But for the most part, it's unlimited. I've never heard of anyone running into it. And so there's also kind of this debate on, is it reasonable to even be asking peer reviewers to like just be reviewing this? But on the other hand, it's like, shouldn't you kind of have to include everything? Shouldn't you include as much detail as you can?
Yeah, what is the line between information included and the time investment to go through it?
Right. And really in practice, I think most reviewers aren't even really reading supplementary information anyways, at least not very detailed. Um so yeah, I mean, so the landscape has kind of changed in that way where it's harder to fake stuff when there's kind of a higher expectation for the amount of information you're able to include. But on the other hand, it's like, how much information should you realistically be asked to include? Um, so it's like this tough trade off. But you can definitely, you know, you can stick shit in the supplementary information that probably no one's ever going to look very carefully at, especially if it's like not a super high impact paper. Um, you know, there's definitely mistakes and stuff that people make, and it doesn't, um unless it happens to come up in review, it'll probably never get heavily scrutinized.
Yeah, that's weird. Because yeah, I mean, I guess to what you said before about like, shouldn't you have to include everything? I mean, that does logically make sense because it's all the it's all the information or data that comprise this thing. But, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. The digital era has made a lot of things weird in that way of just like so much information is available at all times now, um, that it's impossible to condense any of it into something comprehensive.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess academia would absolutely suffer there.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was gonna get to before, too, is like, you know, the primary way information is disseminated is through PDFs, basically. um you know, PDFs with embedded images. And you're dealing with these huge volumes of data. You know, and really these PDFs are just like distillations of computer code anyways. You know, if you have an image or a graph, like, it's all data that could just be raw data that could be getting uploaded, and sometimes, occasionally, there are some requirements like that. But it's definitely not the norm. The lower impact journals definitely don't care. So it's really just kind of on people to, you know, upload their stuff to relevant databases if they really want it to be part of the, um, you know, part of that conversation. And, um, and things that aren't considered like good or interesting, that data basically just gets like hoarded. Even stuff that could be published, you know, if you're in sort of a prestigious lab, you know, they're not going to just publish something because they can. Um, and so then it brings this debate of, you know, how obviously there's an accessibility problem of literally all these PDFs are just paywalled for other academics to read. Not, you know, not even for industry people to read, or at least not for like a reasonable cost.
Hmm.
Um, but um also that it's not presented in a way that computers can really read and crunch all this
So
data.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like you can now more so with like the interactive PDFs, but like the original PDFs that people think of, right, where it's compiled and then it is just a thing. Like, can you even text analyze that? Like early PDFs, you couldn't even copy text out of, right? Like the text
Ye-
wasn't an element.
Um, yeah, so you can. I think most PDFs are like text interactable now, and
Yeah, I guess it's better now. But yeah, when you said that, I was thinking like, why PDFs? Because like, can you even get the text out of that? Because like,
well, it's even worse. For a while, all the journals kind of were doing this weird thing where you couldn't even get the PDF like in a single click. It would like open up like their horrible like embedded viewer thing, and then you'd have to click a second button. And a couple of them still do that, but I think like most of them have like thought better of it. But a couple of, of course, like most things, there's a monopoly of like just a few publishers in most fields. Um and yeah, there's like one that still really does that.
yeah. So this is particularly relevant to my experience because like this is sort of the in line of like what my job becomes of like improving systems and how data analysis can be like how data can be you know concatenated or put into neat forms and stuff like that. And like, yeah, the thought of like running an entire system on just like PDFs being passed around, like when you have data graphs and stuff like that, where like that data just would have to be manually transposed or just would not be received in uh in any automatic capacity. It's just like what a fucking nightmare. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure the answer is yes, but is academia just a lot of like we do this because this is the way we've always done this? Like
Yeah, I mean pretty much. I mean because like when it's a job, being a professor, it's a job you pretty much hold until you die. Um I mean, you literally hold like at least the title of professor emeritus until you die, and very often you could literally be like working up until you die. With students. Um but yeah, so I mean things just don't turn over very fast, and a lot of things, the way, the a lot of times the way of doing things is hard to turn over cuz it's like, well, yeah, it would be better if we didn't have to publish papers just to get out of school, basically. um and if there were some more holistic measures of progress, so we didn't have to, sort of pump papers out, and could instead just focus on the project, focus on, putting data into relevant databases as it's done. But of course nobody wants to be the one who's like, well, I'm not going to publish papers, um and everything is based on that. When you use a facility, like, they even need to, even like government facilities, like they need to get funding. So you need to publish so they can say that you publish using their stuff.
right.
Um so it's like this loop of, well, how do you get rid of this if it's like the thing that it's the currency of everything, basically.
Yeah, and I guess part of the problem too, particularly with like the data stuff, is like because academia, I guess, isn't cooperative; it's analytical. There's no
Hmm.
incentive to do stuff like that. Like when somebody is publishing, they'd rather have their nice PDF graph because it looks good to people who are going to read it. I mean, people think PDF graphs are neat and clean or whatever. That's like the idea, right, of it. And so
Hmm.
they don't care about having um, a table or graph that the data is easily accessible because it's not on them to give the data to someone. It's the someone who needs the data needs to come in and analyze it
Yeah.
and grab it.
Yeah, so on the really top end of things like nature and stuff, like they've started making you at least make like a signed statement that says something like, we have the raw data, we'll make it available to you. And I think they even highly recommend that you just like upload the raw data that goes with all your main figures. Um,
Yeah, because it seems like that would make
but
writing future papers like way more convenient for everyone down the line and like streamline the whole process, which you would think
definitely.
ideally would be the value of scientific academia is making the information as readily accessible as possible to continue finding more information.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's just like I think it's people just like don't want the level of scrutiny, especially because again, it is all formalized into this like paper writing process
Right.
where if you're providing all your raw data and there's some small mistake, like you have to go through and submit like a formal correction. There's a big notice slapped on your paper that says like, this paper was corrected. Um
Like shame
and I
them for fixing their
yeah,
mistake.
yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely some I've always felt that part of the antsiness, especially among people who do like more computational stuff or do like a lot of like numerical data analysis, I've always assumed part of the antsiness is like, well, they can't come into an organic chemist's lab and like see that they did all the steps of the reaction exactly right. So why should they get to like scrape through my code or scrape through my numbers, and make sure everything's perfect?
Yeah, I guess, but like still like what is the thought process behind the large this paper has been corrected? Like what's the value add there?
I think it's supposed to be so that well, okay, I mean, but realistically it's really cuz everything is still formatted like a print journal. And in a print journal, the only way you would correct something is well, you got the old issue, and when you get the next issue in the mail, you'll see a thing that says, "Oh, actually like this had to be corrected." And really I think it's a follow through of that. Every correction still gets its own sort of notice. And I don't know, maybe that's valuable, but
I don't feel
um,
like it is. The only situation I can think of it adding value is if someone is actively using that data and they're returning to the paper, they see a notice that says, "Hey, these values have changed. Update your values." But like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
but
know.
I think there's a very low barrier in terms of main text, and again, I think this doesn't apply to supporting information. Like supporting information is like very much treated like not a big deal. Like I think because they even always put big notes on supporting information that's like the journal has not formatted this, we haven't like done anything to this, this is just what the authors gave us. Whereas there's like an intense like proofing and editing process for like your actual main text.
Right.
But changes to main text, I think even like pretty superficial changes like mislabeled like axes are generally treated as like a correction. And they usually make a very big deal out of like the conclusions of the study have not changed, like this doesn't change our main interpretation. Um that's what most corrections look like. But yeah,
It feels weird because I have to imagine there's at least a small subset, and I don't know how large that subset is, but I imagine there's at least a small subset of people that if they see a paper that has that label of this has been corrected, they're sort of like
yeah, it makes you
it's
makes
like
you wary.
derision in a way, like like fuck this guy, he had to correct his
But
paper.
but but it's strange because at the same time, like stuff that really gets out, once it does get beyond the academic sphere, correction is basically impossible.
Mhm.
Um, the most high profile example, obviously being like the vaccines cause autism study, which was like I think retracted within like a month or something, like famously. Um, but it's just like and I think it's like a way bigger conspiracy than that too. I wish I could remember like the details of it, but
Of the
um
vaccine causing autism.
yeah,
It was like
yeah.
one paper that got published, and he lost his credentials. And
Yes.
it was removed, or it was debunked, or whatever the process is. It was
Yeah.
it was discredited, and he was discredited. But yes, it
Yes.
spread like wildfire, and people always cite this one article that is not like a comprehensive study that multiple articles were done. It was like one person.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to me now. I think it was even deeper that like he was trying to market his like product. It was something about like the reason it was the MMR vaccine, and the reason he was suggesting it did this was like because of something in the gut. He like made up this tangential disease. Um and the reason for it was because he was trying to like sell an experimental drug or something. It's like way more complicated than I ever even knew. But getting away from the point, it's yeah, and there was a lot of back and forth on the same stuff with COVID. I mean, there were bad actors on like sort of both sides of COVID research. Um, some basically like grifting to say COVID's not a big deal, to say, um, mostly to say certain drugs work. Um, hydroxychloroquine being good or bad, and like, um, because I think like one of there were a lot of discredits. Like I think real science was getting discredited because I guess like one of the studies that said hydroxychloroquine was bad or like didn't work for COVID did get retracted. Um, I can't even like remember the whole back and forth of it.
Yeah, that was a
Um,
whole shit show of stuff.
right. But then layered on top of that, there's also like this really fundamental just misunderstanding of science where I remember there was like a early like April or May 2020 like study about masks, I think. Um where it was like this really highly like like the media was all or the like right-wing media was treating this like it was like an anti-mask study,
Oh
like
yeah, this is
basically
the one
like
where they like took the like they misinterpreted the data where it showed that like masks they weren't effective if you're standing right next to someone and sneeze or whatever, and so people were like,
yeah,
gotcha, they don't work. And it's like,
right,
no, that's like such a low subset of what's going to happen.
right, and you go and read the literally the abstract, and I think there's literally a line that says like we did determine that like masks are effective like for preventing COVID-19, like at least in a medical setting.
Right.
Um and it's literally like one of the lines of the abstract, I think. Um and people still misinterpret it. And it's because like again, like people don't think to go and read papers. People don't even think to go and read the abstract of a paper.
Right. And I mean
Um
that's not exclusive to academia. I mean that happens with like non-academic articles, like that happens with that happens with tweets or like posts on
yeah,
forums and stuff like that. Like
that's
people
true.
take the quick line and then they go with it. That's why the Onion
Yeah.
works. Like that's why the
Yeah.
Onion exists as a company that gets people. Like because people are dumb and they'll read the line with like, oh, this must be true because I've read it, and consider nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably silly to assume that, all these people are even acting in good faith.
Well, yeah,
Um, you know, Surely they're not, but it really is interesting how what papers actually say doesn't really govern anything about how they're reported on or um, what have you. Um, and I guess that sort of brings me to the other one like thing I wanted to bring up, which is there. I mean, most of the things I'm talking about, I think they're are people on both sides of it, but it's generally just that the sentiment among, I think most older people is usually, well, no, we're not going to change it because this is like how it works, and I've already like learned how to play this game. Um, like why would they want double blind publishing if single blind publishing gets their papers published? Um, because and a lot of these things are starting to become optional. Like I think Nature does have a checkbox where you can be like, I would like to do double blind publishing. I don't think anyone clicks it. And Nature also has an option, and all their like subsidiary journals, to they're inherently open access journals. I think there are some lower ones that you can publish for free because it's like, well, they want papers, they want more papers under their wing. They want, if you can't publish in their nice journal, well, come to our crappy one, like but generally, if you want good science published and open access, you have to literally pay money. You just get, so you can, I think in all the like Nature journals, there's one they have that's specifically an open access journal. There's like a flat fee. I think it's like $5,000. I think for like, if you want to just straight up publish in Nature and have it be like open to everyone to read, I think you have to pay like $15,000 or something.
Insane.
Yeah, and it's basically like they're just saying, you have to like recoup the cost of what we would make from this
Right.
otherwise. Um, and this is a system that doesn't pay the reviewers. Like people who peer review papers don't get paid. They only just recently started getting like public recognition if they want it. Um, like, and really you're providing their content. People are sometimes surprised when I tell them that like our lab doesn't get money for like getting a paper accepted. I mean, we sort of indirectly do.
Right.
Projects
You
might get
get
funded because you
prestige
publish.
that you can point to.
Yes, and so the journals kind of
You guys work for
justify it
clout,
on that.
basically.
Yeah. It's like working for exposure, and that's how I think the journals justify it. And there's no way to fight it because you can't just not go publish in these journals. You have to. But yeah, I mean, and all these reviewers just like do it again, like on the, either for sort of goodwill with the editor. I think that's probably a big part. Because at the end of the day, who really decides if your paper gets published is the editor.
Yeah.
Like the person, they're looking at what the reviewers said, but at the end of the day, it's really like the editor looks at it and decides.
Yeah.
So
I guess a problem is too, like, I mean, like changing anything in this vein is like a problem of human psychology. Like, if you want to make things harder, then people are going to be like, well, why are you making things harder? Like doing like a double blind study, right? People are going to be like, well, I don't want that. That makes it harder. But
yeah,
if you want to make things easier, people who have already done it are going to be like, well, no, I had to do this. Everyone else should have to do this.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, that's like a big that's it's a really big problem in a game I play called RuneScape, where this game has been around for years and years at this point, and has gotten a re-release version that is the old game again, the old school RuneScape, and like stuff will be not implemented because people will be like, well, no, this makes things easier, and I had to do it the hard way.
right.
Everyone should have to do it the hard way.
Yeah. That's a huge sentiment. There was, so for whatever reason, um, journal editors are sometimes allowed to write editorials, which I shouldn't. I mean, that's fine. It's usually just like about science. It's usually just kind of a general perspective on some topic in the field or how people should do better. Sometimes they're really funny. I saw one recently where this guy um grinded up like a hazelnut and blended it in with like cobalt or something and showed that it was like quote unquote a better catalyst than like some state of the art catalyst. And basically his point was like, you guys like need to be more rigorous and stop just like saying, oh well, we looked at this one metric and it's better. So basically sometimes these are really, really sassy. They don't usually include an experiment like that, but he did like a funny experiment to like prove his point in his editorial.
Right.
But um I guess for whatever reason, people usually think so little about these like editorials that there's basically no oversight. So there's been like a couple notable examples of like extremely inflammatory editorials on like pretty like political or like controversial topics like getting published. The most notable example being that there was like this German pretty like significant like German chemistry journal that published this just insane editorial. And actually I don't even think this was by I don't even know that he was an editor for the journal. I think he just like submitted this. I don't quite understand how it happened. Um, which the basic gist of it was saying that diversity is not a strength in chemistry, or in science. It also includes like a bunch of other insanely batshit points, which is basically like grad students should be completely subservient to their professors, like, you know, um, working 70, 80 hours a week, whatever's required is just like part of the gig. Like it was basically just like every old school attitude in the book. It's like
Mm.
basically like, homogeneity. Like it literally says like homogeneity of like identity is like better for the field. Um, I wish I could remember all the details. This one did get removed pretty quickly, so I would not be able to find it fast.
Yeah.
Um, I think I saved the PDF or somebody sent it to me after the fact, but I think that was a huge incident. I think like the whole editorial board stepped down. Um, but it's still crazy that it happened.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's so where do these editorials just also go in the same journals that like these articles are going in? They just don't have the same
yeah,
rigorous restriction?
yeah, it's the exact same journal. I mean, they would. I think they're usually separated out. Like there'd be like a research article section. In each issue, there's probably like one editorial, and then like that's sectioned out from like the research articles. Like you'd be able to tell, but um, and of course, I think there's usually some note that's like, we haven't really looked at this. This is just their opinion, whatever. But again, it's usually not stuff like that, but just sometimes it is. There's also one called um the perils of politicizing science, um which is one of the least cited but highest like social media metric scores I've ever seen. Because of course it's like picked up by all these insane blogs and it's all over Twitter and stuff, and
Right.
the person who wrote it goes on a bunch of podcasts. Um but it's just a very uninspired rant about how like cancel culture is ruining science basically. Um that one is still around too. And I think there's even like another editorial in another journal that's like a response to it. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just it's truly crazy. Like especially like these what professors will sometimes like feel empowered to like put out in official journals.
Yeah, that's I don't know. I feel like if I was trying to get something in the world, I'd be more concerned about how it reflects on me. But I guess that's also like
Yeah.
the people doing these things are more like egomaniacal than that. They just assume that
Well,
their opinion is right.
yeah, and yeah, I think it's I think a lot of people like probably harbor opinions that um they feel very strongly that they're right about, and
Oh yeah.
get like uh get very angry, like you often can't see it in the types of people that would um like speak out against trans people, for example. They know it's bad. They know it's bad to say,
Mhm.
but they feel so strongly that they're right that they feel like they have to say it.
Do they know it's bad?
Um,
They know that there's going to be a social outcry, but I don't know if that's the same as knowing it's bad.
yeah, that's true. Maybe they don't know it's bad. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, I just see it as that sort of like I think it's that they know there's going to be a social backlash, but they actually feel they're so empowered and so safe
Yeah.
that, and it's so, they feel it's so important to say these things that they do it anyways.
Yeah. They think it's their responsibility to set people straight.
Yeah.
Which is again, like I said, it's egomaniacal. It's fucking wild that yeah, that stuff like that happens. Like,
Yeah.
and even when it's not like pursuant to, well, actually, no, I guess that one still is. I was gonna say even when it's not pursuant to like actively being harmful to people, but I guess even the editorial that is like science should be homogenous was also like that would be harmful to minorities, since I assume they were talking about homogenously white.
Yes, I think it's specifically like they're saying it's good when it's like white and male because we can like collaborate better.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I just like I can't imagine when, because it has to be I mean it has to be a thing of academia, like your whole thing is your reputation, even if it like unspokenly, but once something happens to damage that, it becomes the spoken thing of like everyone can see this because it's attached to you.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because I feel like that's been part of, what I wanted to sort of tell you is like how really so much of, all this is just fueled by people, and really, the other experts are probably going to be people you meet a lot, people you see all the time, or you read their papers all the time, and again, it might be just 10 people in the world, maybe fewer, who are really dealing with what you're dealing with. So they're always the people reading your papers. They're the people, accepting your talks, and um, and doing all these things for you, and deciding you know, um, whether you're going to help each other, or I mean, that's a whole other thing, is how author lists inflate as well. Um, what does a paper with 30 authors mean versus a paper with 3? But yeah, it is interesting that in this field, like, so based on leveraging your reputation in order to get things done, even more than your expertise, you're really leveraging like your ability to talk to people, communicate to people, and people still sometimes just choose to like put these things out in the world.
Yeah. In the process of getting like a grant or funding or trying to get published again or anything, if you
Hmm.
point and say, look at this, is it more important to point and say, look at this article, I got it published here, or is it look at this article I got published, look how cool the science I did is?
I mean, it's definitely well, of course, at some point your reputation is self-evident. Um and of course, like, there's some conflation of, you're a senior professor, you've done lots of great things, you're writing this new grant. Well, one, you're going to be good at it because you've done this a million times, and like, the things to say, and you know how to make it sound cool, and all that. But on the other hand, it's like they're already going into it knowing who you are. It's the other thing. Grant review isn't even like blind. Um, they know who you are. They know like um, you know, they know your reputation. They probably know what you've done. Like so, um, you don't even really have to like draw specific examples of your achievements, but um, it's definitely a combination. I would say in getting a grant, I think it's a really explicit combination of, hey, look, like I've gotten all these papers into good journals, and saying, this is kind of what we learned. This is what we still need to learn. That's why you should give us money.
Right.
Um, so it's both. For papers, I mean, it's definitely less explicitly saying like, look, your past papers aren't going to necessarily help you as much with your current paper. Um, you definitely have to lean more on, what's in the science. But I would say you definitely get a boost by that implicit reputation. Um, and just of course, if you have, well, if you're citing 10 of your own papers, like people are going to notice that. I mean, maybe they'll think you're a little arrogant, but if you truly learned things from all those papers, then obviously that gives you a leg up too. So it's hard to like slice out what's like reputation and what's like showing off versus like what's just the natural scientific progression.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I guess I wouldn't have really thought about reputation as a facet of this, even though like it naturally would be. Um, to me, it would have been about the science or whatever. But it's interesting. Like the mental comparison I immediately leap to is like um, competitive gaming. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you enter the pool of a new game, right? Everyone's far and wide. Every game you're playing with new people. But as you climb and climb, which in academia would be, as you get more specialized in whatever it is you're doing, like you start to see the same names a lot of the time. And so when something bad happens, like if someone has a reputation of being a bit of an asshole, that is going to impact when you see that name as a part of something. Or like if like even worse, obviously if they get caught fudging data or something one time, like every time going
Yeah,
forward, you're gonna be like, I know that name and that's not good.
yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I think it's very similar. It's and um, but also, there was particularly like this New York Times big expose about um this like big famous um medical professor who I mean honestly I'm sure if you type in those terms you would find the exact article, but it's sort of what I described earlier. It's like I don't know if you know what like gels look like. I don't really do them either, but if you know what like the electrophoresis like gels look like, basically there's just like black lines, and they tell you what's there. I get by like how far they move through the gel, essentially. Um, and in the New York Times article, they literally have a GIF of like, okay, these are the two things he was comparing. Let's take this one over here and shift it over. They completely overlap. Like it's literally like impossible that they would be, this similar. There's no error. Um and this is sometimes how people get caught too, is um in just normal plots, is looking at the noise usually, is like if you're saying something is super super stable for 100 hours, well, it's like, oh, interesting, you have this exact same blip every 1 hour on the dot, kind of weird.
Yeah, so
um
that's what I was kind of like. That's what I was talking about with the like. Why don't they make data more accessible because then you could automate things like that, right? Like you could have
Yeah.
a flag system set up that is comparing like the noise plots, or like, you know, if you have image analysis, making sure that two images aren't just the same image. Like there's so many things you could do if you set up your systems to be about accessibility and identifying data.
Well, it's interesting because people even kind of write like meta papers about this, and some of these databases exist. You know, a good example is there's like a failed reaction database, which is supposed to be like, you know, you report all your reactions that didn't work, so you can fuel this like machine learning. Um, you know, because you don't know what works. Like when you're trying something new, you've identified a hole in the literature, you're trying to make a new compound or something. Um, for all you know, you're just like doing something that somebody did, you know, you're going through the same motions that somebody did 6 months ago when they identified this same hole.
Yeah.
So it's always this question of like, you see this glaring hole. Is it there because nobody's thought of it? Or, you know, maybe unlikely? Or is it because they all tried and it didn't work? And you never know that unless you're just like talking to the right people.
Right.
Um, but again, I think it's like some people don't like that idea that you would be able to like know what everyone else has tried because they see that as like the competition. They see that as part of this competition.
Right, and that's what
Um,
I don't know, that's what's weird for me to wrap my head around, particularly with things like, I mean, I guess yeah, you want to, like, if you failed, you want to find the next thing or whatever, but also shouldn't it be about progressing information
right,
data and
right, but that's just like not how it's structured, really. I mean, like I think you talk to most people and they do mean well. They are really interested. Um, but at the same time, they've been brought up in the system where they really want to compete. They want to, you know, keep doing better and like keep publishing more um and it basically just comes down to whether the prestige gets the better of people. Um and you know what I was going to say about this like medical professor who was faking data is he was like not really remorseful at all. And he was like arrogant about a lot of other stuff too. He was like, "Yeah, I'm not even really here most of the time. Like, I hate this city. I spend most of my time in Italy." Um, and you know, and this is a guy who was literally publishing something like 200 papers a year or something. Um, and just like didn't seem to really, you know, really care at all when caught. Um, And I don't even know, you know, I don't know what happened to him. I think he was still employed, like at the time the article came out. I don't know if he stayed, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
but it has to be a
Um,
black mark on anything he future tries to publish, right?
totally, totally. But it's just like that's the other thing is like, you know, you're supposed to have all this security and that's why they can say things like this in the first place. You're supposed to have all this security, so once you're at a certain point in your career it's like so hard to remove you.
Shit like
um
that should like be pointed against your tenure or your job
yeah,
security and stuff like that. Like if you do that, if you're literally like, I don't care about doing this anymore because you can't fire me, so I'm just gonna do whatever I want. Like you should be like, well then actually we're going to fire you.
yeah,
That's crazy. Yeah, the tenure system's fucking weird.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's, I mean, there's definitely some, you know, the scramble for tenure is definitely like what pushes uh you know, pushes things out the door that like probably shouldn't be, and like why grad students like probably get pushed harder, like, you know, earlier in the professor's like career cycle and stuff like that. Like their first round of grad students is probably pushed mega hard because
Yeah.
like what else can they do? Like, you know, and from your perspective, you're just like sitting on your ass, like if you're a professor and like, you know, you used to spend 60 hours in a week, like a week collecting data, and now you're just like, why are my grad students like enjoying their lives? I need to yell at them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I meant with like the I had it hard, you should have it hard. Like
Yeah,
it's such
yeah,
a
definitely.
pervasive mindset with people, and it's like it comes from such a weird place. I don't know. I guess it's an empathy thing of like you have to be able to say like you have to be retrospective in that like oh I remember that and that sucked. I shouldn't want people to do that because it sucked.
Yeah, I think you get very far removed very quickly. I can hear it just in how other grad students like kind of talk about undergrads. There's like this weird eagerness, I think, like people want to do it like immediately. Like people get to their like first year of grad school and like act like they have nothing in common with an undergrad anymore.
I guess it's sort of implicit in the system, right? Because it's so much a system about achievements that you need to mentally be like I'm not them, I'm better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, there's people are like quick to distance themselves from it. But in my experience, like really solid mentors don't treat it that way.
Yeah,
Like they don't, of course there are going to be like natural hierarchical things and responsibilities you just can't realistically give an undergrad, for example, working in a research lab. Um but that's mostly based on time and of course like, somewhat just based on expertise, but um it's not like they automatically don't have the capacity to do things. And I think that's like people really get to the point where that's like how they feel, because also sometimes just like the terminology gap that like, younger students have, or technique gaps, for example. I think this is sometimes a miscommunication when people come into grad school is people seem like they're smarter because their undergrad had more stuff. Or not even more stuff sometimes, but just stuff that's maybe more relevant to the work they're doing now. And so you're comparing two students to like join a lab, for example, and you might think, well, this one knows all the techniques we use. They must be the smarter student. Um, where the other one might have the same capacity to pick those things up, but it's just they haven't experienced them before.
yeah. This is weirdly this sort of thing is a thing I've thought about a lot in my life, given my upbringing and my profession. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I'm a programmer, like so many times when you tell people you're a programmer, you talk about what you're doing, they'll be like, I don't understand how you do that. It seems impossible. I could never learn to do that. And I've talked to other programmers and like in particular Alaric, who I lived with for years. We had a long conversation about like there are three kinds of people when it comes to learning programming. There's a decent chunk of people that like this is how their brain works and it'll click for them. There is a much larger section of people that like it isn't inherently how their brain works, like following the logical flow of like writing programs, but they could
Mm-hmm.
learn. Like it would be. That's a huge subset of people. That's most people, and there's a very small subset of people that is like this person will probably never learn to program, and most people assume they're in category three, but that's such a small subset. And like yeah, it's like you said, like having access to that information because of their undergrad is an advantage, but it doesn't mean the other person can't. And like um I have three siblings, and I did the best in school, just like mostly because of math. Like math clicked for me pretty well, and so as a
Mm-hmm.
result, like I did really well in math. And like my siblings will put themselves down and like will uh like they list me as like the smart sibling, quote unquote, and like they would be like, oh well, we're just not as smart as you. We can never do it. It's like we're from the same house. I lived with you my entire life. We had access to the same information. It's not that like I wasn't like nobody is born with inherent knowledge. Like that's
Yeah.
not how that works. Like this just happens that like my interests align with academics. My brother could tell me way more about art stuff than I will ever be able to say because that's where his interests lie. And like, yeah, there are inherent advantages with like the undergrad system, but like, yeah, like you said, there's some stuff that's hierarchical, like has to be on hierarchy, and it makes sense to do so. But like, how different really is an undergrad year 4 to a grad student year 1?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the differences that there are not in formalized knowledge. Um, it's like just in like the practice of like information processing, I guess. Just being able to like skim a paper and be like, okay, yeah, that part's not important. Like, okay, don't need to look at that. I just need to like look at these couple of numbers in the figures or something. Um, it's like that super fast information processing and just like all the little, physical stuff of, whatever the little actual like work you have to do with your hands is.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess to make the
But it's
question
but
more pointed, what's the difference between an undergrad year 4 in May and a grad student year 1 in September?
Oh, yeah, I mean nothing. Yeah, exactly. Um and well, and in some cases like the undergrad might be better. But it's also, I often say like PhDs I think are much more like a test of resiliency and perseverance than like intelligence. Um
Yeah.
and I'm often like different from most people in the room because I was like sort of traditionally like very bad at math. Like I still can't do like I couldn't like go through a multiplication table, quickly or whatever. Um there later on I was like mostly okay, but it was just like never my uh natural thing. Where most people I talk to, like especially in my field, are just like, "Oh, of course, I was always good at math."
Yeah.
Um and and I very nearly like quit just because of like organic chemistry. I was like, "Wow, this just like really isn't for me," and I still don't get it at all. But you realize like none of that stuff really matters if you can just like get past that and like get where you think you need to be. Um, None of that is really important as long as you can like do your little, subsection that's like important to you day to day and know when to ask other people for help.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's, I mean, that's that's a much broader topic of like the problem with the like university degree system on the whole of like it's such a wide spectrum where you might be funneling into a specific niche once you get out that like you think, oh, I can't do this because I can't do this thing that I have to do every day when I'm getting my degree. But that
right,
thing might never be a thing you're doing when you find a job that you're doing. My
right,
degree, I went to school for computer science because I wanted to be a programmer. Most of my courses were electrical engineering. Does not even come close to approaching what I do on a day-to-day basis. I don't see
right.
breadboards or circuits or wires or anything. I write code. But I think if I had stayed the entire um 5 years without electives, I would have taken 4 programming courses.
What?
Yeah. And then I would have taken more for electives and like senior designs and stuff like that. But like,
Yeah,
yeah, it would
yeah.
have been like 4 or 5. It was like one a year.
Wow.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it's weird.
honestly, it really is. If I were to think about, of course, like the general breadth of knowledge is like helpful,
But
and
yeah,
it's good to at least like always have kind of an awareness of all the adjacent fields to you for the most part. But like, yeah, I mean, if I thought about like the percentage of like topics from my undergrad that I even cross my mind day to day, it's like so little. And you know, there's just whole days where it's just like you're also doing like a physical job on top of it. You just have to like, you know, you're like a lab monkey, and you know, if things go well, you're hopefully becoming more of like a desk jockey by like the end. You know, where you're just like writing papers and like helping your professor with things. But you know, you always have to be doing some mix of both. It's also just like it really is such a weird like you are just such like a weird in between person as a graduate student. Like it's, you know,
I
uh
think that's true of college in general. Like
yeah,
no matter what you're studying, you're going to have coursework that has nothing to do with it, and you're like, why am I in this class?
yeah. Yeah, and it's, you know, I see I've been seeing this sort of debate online a little bit recently about how, well, and you know, you always sort of hear this about like, oh, engineers shouldn't be required to take this and that. And you know, engineering departments end up getting run by engineers, so they kind of you know, I feel like they've sort of acquiesced to this, is like a lot of engineering curriculum like basically doesn't make you do that much writing. Um it asks very little of you in terms of like liberal arts curriculum, which is interesting because like the hard sciences you actually do get more of that breadth, because generally you're not in an engineering department, you're in
Yeah, you don't have
at
that
least,
filter.
well, and at both of the schools that I've been at, it's like an arts and sciences department. Um so it's generally like you're in the same college, or sorry, not department, college, I mean.
Yeah,
So it's like
yeah, it's
the
BSA, right? Bachelor of Science and Arts.
not for me, but uh I mean, I guess you can actually get like a bachelor of arts in sciences most of the time. But yeah, so there's usually like a much more generalized curriculum typically for like sciences, where you do like take, you know, philosophy classes and writing classes, um and I think it's like really weird that that seems to be mostly cast aside for like engineers, and people like engineers are just like allowed to be these like weird, um I don't know, like weird, not, you know, very like narrow people, I guess.
But yeah, I mean that was definitely the experience at my school. So like when you go to college, you have an advisor. When I enrolled at the engineering school, I got an engineering advisor as well, and my engineering
Mhm.
advisor was like, "Don't just don't go to your normal advisor. It doesn't matter. We set your course load and everything. Like we are your advisor." Like the engineering school just assigned me another advisor and told me to never go visit the other advisor, and I didn't need to visit the other advisor ever because like there was no purpose for it.
Yeah, I mean, from what I heard at like engineers at my undergrad, at least, it was basically like they're like, Yeah, I took, you know, they took maybe like one writing course their freshman year. You know, maybe like they had time for one or two other like general like electives, but they really like weren't required to take anything else.
That's interesting.
And
My
like,
engineering coursework still had a lot of that stuff. Like I
okay.
took a freshman creative writing course, and then I had to take a technical writing course, which even though it didn't apply to what I was doing, I think it makes sense to make engineering people take a
Oh,
technical writing
definitely.
course because
Yeah,
it will
yeah.
be applicable. I had to take Anthro, I had to take Psych 101. Well, it was Introduction to
Oh,
Logic.
interesting. Yeah, that sounds like more than I feel like in honors engineering they may have gotten away with like even more, or like taking even less maybe, because you know, I don't know if like taking engineering electives somehow like filled in some of the credits or something, but
So sometimes that works. Like sometimes you just need an elective credit, but like I needed like my course load specifically called for like a humanities credit, which is why I took Anthro.
Okay.
Like I needed to take a humanities course. And sometimes it's even more specific. Like sometimes it gives you like two class choices basically for some stuff like that. Like my second writing course, it was like take technical writing or take another some subset of creative writing course. But my
Okay.
like it would have been that, but specifically I think computer science was like you have to take the technical writing course. But general engineering it was like take creative writing two or technical writing.
Okay.
So there were even specializations within that. But like yeah, I don't know. I mean I get the idea of trying to specialize a course load like that. But like also there is some stuff like people should take, like the technical writing course. Like even though I didn't enjoy the class, I firmly believe engineering students should take a technical writing course because
Oh yeah.
there's a good chance you end up in something like that where you have to write some sort of technical writing thing. And like, yeah, maybe you don't, but also having that is a valuable skill.
Yeah, definitely. Um no, I mean that's so much of science, and it sounds like I mean, I know a lot of scientists aren't like really prepared for that reality, and it sounds like usually the situation is even worse in engineering.
Yeah,
Like they're not prepared for the fact that like everything you do is just like talking to people and writing things.
yeah. I would not say my courses were an adequate reflection of like what my professional life became at all.
Yeah.
Because even in programming courses, like I mean, this probably isn't as applicable to like something like chemistry, where like as chemistry classes, you're gonna take a lab, which prepares you for having a job where you're in a lab. But
Yeah, yeah.
like with my programming courses, they didn't really teach us like Git or like project management stuff. Like we wrote programs and we like just turned in those programs, but that's not how the world works. You don't write a program and then hand it to your boss on a flash drive. You need to deploy it in some sort of environment where it's reachable by people. You need to know
Yeah.
firewall and network stuff if it's like a website or an API where someone needs to hit it. Like it needs to be deployed, available, and accessible. Like and
Yeah,
I
I
wasn't taught any of that.
that
I didn't finish. But
that's interesting, and that's like a place where I can see hypothetically. I mean, I think on really, while things might move faster in something like programming, um, obviously there are still some barriers where like companies just arbitrarily, because that's the way like things have been done, will want you to have a degree for no reason. But I
yeah,
can see how hypothetically like programming could, and I think is like diversifying, maybe it's not diverse, but is diversifying and like has the potential to diversify, because like a coding boot camp, or like even like probably just like a community college like coding course can move a lot faster than like the structure of a university can move. And like
yeah,
university structures aren't really equipped to or built to like move at the rate with you know which like a field like programming is changing. It's built for things like chemistry and biology, which it works like decently well at. Um, but well, decently well at like teaching you the skills, except I think then where the academic culture is a barrier is in like fostering more diversity of like both identity and of thought,
yeah.
honestly. Um, and like, if you do go through like the whole like grad school structure as well, like things are just so slow, and like I said, it's just like slow to turn people over. There's these sort of artificial barriers of like what did your school have access to. If you're like an underrepresented student, you might come from a school like with less resources, you might like be unfairly disadvantaged on paper. um there's so many like things that go into this.
So I guess if I had to like condense when I was talking about with the engineering coursework into a question, it would be like, is there a level of abstraction in academia rather than practicality? Like if I had taken a networking course in my programming class, right, it would have taught me like what a firewall was and how it works and all of that stuff, but it wouldn't have practically taught me when I have an application why I need my firewall or how to set it up. Like, is there that level of abstraction for you in academia? Like, does that happen, or is it like way more practical?
So I think the abstraction is in that sometimes there are entire like niches of certain fields or questions that are, it's kind of what I said earlier about like, everyone's reading each other's paper intros, um and you're just convincing like your fellow academics that this is like a problem that matters. um but sometimes there's really like, if you go and ask a company, you know, about certain things, they'll just be like, "Oh, this is like completely absurd," or like, "We don't care about this at all." And I definitely have some skepticism in that direction as well, because like sometimes companies I think are so driven by bottom line that they aren't even really considering like what's good for the environment or convenient for consumers, or um you know or that you might go to a company and they'll say it's stupid, like this costs way too much, but what if this is the type of device that's like relevant for like more rural areas or that don't have access to like grid electricity. And of course sometimes people make those arguments too, but I think it's just that like um there is definitely some narrow-mindedness to academia in that everyone's just kind of tossing the same ball back and forth, without like really seeing if it's practical. Um, but then sometimes I think the people who do really interact with like industrial partners and try to make it super practical are perhaps like sometimes being like, from my point of view, maybe like too capitalistic and like too pragmatic about things. Um, and not really using what I think is a strength of academia, which is really not everything needs to be about a practical problem. And I really think it's a trap that, even like these super theoretical chemists, like studying all the different structures of ice, are like forced to, you know, justify the importance, the broad importance of their work.
Right.
Um, and so I think it is sort of, I think it's sort of problematic that sometimes, physical scientists are trying to solve problems that they claim are practical but actually aren't. But I think there's also a problem that sometimes there's too much pressure to be practical in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there has to be some level of practicality to warrant it, I guess. Like, information for the sake of information is like a nice idea in an idyllic society. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if we had a society like that was run by robots and everything got done, so that everyone could just pursue whatever they wanted. Ideally, some people would be pursuing information for the sake of information, but like, yeah, I mean, I guess there has to be some practical outcome to like, at the very least, fund these things. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, you'll find that like the flavor of research, I think, across the globe tends to be very different. China, I think Chinese research tends to also be very practical, but I think China is really interested in energy. Um,
right. And that,
Energy research is actually quite poorly funded in the US, I think, compared to health. Americans are obsessed with health. Americans want to like live forever, and China wants to like have like the world's cheapest energy, like, I guess. And, I mean, Americans like batteries. Like, I feel like there's a lot of battery research in the US,
yeah, I
but
mean, the
anyways,
practicality of stuff like that comes from where the societal impact is, right? Like, because China
yeah.
is so dense, like negatively impactful energy is like way more impactful to them. Like, you
Yeah.
can see the smog in China. Like it's very
Yeah.
like tangibly
Totally.
there. So like cleaner, cheaper energy becomes like way more of a factor. Whereas in the US, it's like batteries are convenient, and if we have better batteries, our convenience is better.
Yeah. And then I think like because like I think the well-funded like fundamental research tends to be in other parts of the globe and like especially Europe. Um, but yeah, I think fundamental science is just like not super well funded in the US anymore.
Yeah, I guess that's a downside of like having funding be so specifically tied to everything. But there's no way to remove it, I guess. Like in an ideal world, I guess like everything you publish on or you study like will produce money to fund the next thing you do, but that's not how anything works. If you study a bug for 3 years, that bug did not make you money. Like you learned about the bug and the information may
Yeah.
be valuable, but there was no tangible outcome to that like became money.
Yeah. Um well, and to me that's like where the advantage of academic research should be is that it doesn't have to make money. Um but
But the
I
money
don't
has to
know.
come from somewhere.
Yeah, but there's definitely, I think I think a great example of like this dichotomy though is like for such a and things change. Like something I've seen recently is just like the price, as like solar energy and wind energy gets better and cheaper, which is like exponentially cheaper in like the last 10 years is um there was kind of a midpoint where people, for so long people were talking about like hydrogen economy, hydrogen energy. This was like the biggest thrust in like electrocatalysis for years and years is they were saying everything's going to run on hydrogen. Um and there was like sort of a midpoint where like everyone was hyped on that, like everyone had reached like max hype for that idea, but then people started to say like, wait, no, this is like really dumb. Like this is because everything like has to be justified on cost, and so like it basically doesn't matter if it's like environmentally better if it's gonna be too expensive.
Right.
um like unfortunately you just like have to find a market solution or it will like not be accepted. um and But what's interesting is now, like in the intervening like last couple of years, like now because of advances in like solar and wind, now that energy is really cheap. And if you can like say that you're going to power it on like solar and wind, then like it starts to look practical again, or like it's close to practical at this point from like a cost perspective of like how much energy you get out per dollar. Um, but I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm like all in on like hydrogen economy idea or not, but it's just like it's interesting that it changes. Like it can have these ups and downs, like just based on like the capitalists like bottom line of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I'm gonna compare this to something imaginary again, and throughout the course of this episode,
Okay.
look like a fucking simpleton the whole time. But like, this is a thing that crops up a lot in sci-fi, and I imagine it directly stems from academia, where like in science fiction, something is discovered that is like usually it's revolutionary because it's sci-fi and it needs to be the premise of the thing, but it can't be funded because it won't return or it costs a lot to do it. So as a result, the military is brought in to fund it on the stipulation that some sort of like weapons or defense technology be developed
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
technology. And like yeah, that's sort of like it's the same sort of idea, right? Where like oh, I have this thing I want to study. I need to get money for it. And I need to be able to point to that person and say, your money's valuable because this information is valuable in some way.
I mean, in a way, really, that is sometimes like how things get done. I mean, in a somewhat less cynical sense, I mean, I'm sure there's some cynical angle to it, but quite surprisingly, sometimes literally the U.S. Army does fund incredibly fundamental
Oh
research
yeah.
for seemingly like no reason or gain.
Well, because it is a
Um,
benefit to them. I mean, the government, like particularly the military, runs on the lowest cost contract, right? Like they aren't looking for this is the thing people talk about with defense contracts in particular. Like they don't look for the person who's the best or the most qualified. They look for the lowest number and they take that contract. Like
yeah,
and so like studying something fundamental, like if you can study batteries and make batteries smaller or cheaper, like that's great. And like yeah, the government's all about that. And like it doesn't even have to be militaristic. Like I mean, that's NASA's MO too. If you can make stuff lighter or more compact, they can better manage the weight of crafts and thus do more. And like, so yeah, I mean, in that way, the information is valuable. Like, yeah, I mean, it sucks to be tied to like the this bottom line stuff, but in that way, like government funding is really valuable because it is a true funding of this information is valuable to us because it can then be used in a way
yeah, definitely.
which defended the government, which felt weird, but like I mean yeah I do think that in some ways government funding of scientific research is valuable if it's genuinely being used to further advance the society. Usually it
Yeah,
is
well,
the government's.
it's hard to really talk about it one way or the other because there's not really a choice.
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I mean, well,
ideally
and
there would be
it's
some
either
billionaire that is like, I do want to know what that bug got up to for 3 years.
yeah, I mean, it's either you take the government's money or you take companies' money, and
Yeah,
usually you take both.
yeah,
Um, yeah, but I do think that sometimes I mean, depending on companies for scientific, like for academic research to happen, I think is an even worse state of things than. I mean, the government funding scientific research is really just how it should work.
yeah,
I just think the priorities are wrong.
yeah. With a
Um,
company, it's going to be way more. This needs to be profitable.
exactly. Yeah. Um, and maybe like I mean because the company has their own research wing. They could just have in-house scientists like do it.
Yeah,
Usually their interest in academia is I think like they are interested in the more down the line stuff, but I've also definitely seen like industry partnerships where it's basically just like they function very much as like a branch of the company and they just kind of do maybe they are just looking for slightly more fundamental questions, but it still has, very much a bottom line
yeah. I
purpose.
mean, it's essentially they're funding the people to outsource their R&D department. Like
Yeah.
you do this for us, so we don't have to hire an R&D staff or hire more R&D staff or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's much cheaper to fund a grad student than
Yeah.
you know fund a science like
Professional
a full
PhD,
scientist.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, there I guess there's not really a good answer to the question of funding because there are certain things that just aren't going to see a tangible return on investment and thus are, quote unquote unfundable.
well, yeah, and I mean, uh, well, I don't know. I'd like to say I was gonna say academic research is much more expensive, but I don't know if that's true actually, because I feel like when companies have stuff, they just I feel like if anything, companies are just more specialized. So
Yeah.
I mean, I know for like any national lab government facility, it's like they go all out on everything. They have the best everything, and cost is no object in terms of supplies. And um, but at the same time, I don't. There's weird things everywhere. Um, National labs have this weird structure where if you want to stay employed, you have to keep getting funding. Like you have to keep successfully getting funding. I think they pay for your first couple of years, but you don't have tenure. It's just like constantly seeking funding to pay your own salary. Um, so it's like this weird extreme mix of like being a professor and a grad student. It's like you're kind of a professor, but your job can just like fall out from under you at any point. Um, so yeah, it's I don't know. I think there's no perfect situation.
Based on that, I was like, I have TV shows you would either love or hate because of how familiar that sentiment is. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's not like a there's not like a good solution to that, I guess, because it has to drive it in some capacity, I guess. All right, well, do you have any more oddities you wanted to?
I don't think so. I think I hit my beats.
I, all three episodes I've been in awe because every time I'm like, okay, I know the topic, I know the brief. I don't know how long this is gonna go, and all three times it is clocked at like 2 hours. And I just didn't expect to clock 2 hours every time. Which is, I mean,
Do you edit this down?
so the editing will depend. So like I didn't edit the first episode at all because we were just going along. Um,
Yeah.
the second episode, I don't know. I might need to review it and see. Like, and in this one, like I don't know, we meandered sometimes, but I don't think it was like problematic meandering. Like
Yeah.
it it returned to a point eventually. So I don't know. I'm in favor of like not editing things,
Yeah,
because
I tend to agree.
yeah, unless there was something that like there was like long gaps or something that need to be removed explicitly. Um, I think it's nice to have the whole comprehensive thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll probably just put this up as is, unless if you have something in your mind that like you think back to this and you're like, I would actually like that to be trimmed down or removed, I can do that. But otherwise, yeah, it'll probably just go up
No, I don't think so.
as. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know. I don't know if we did this anonymity thing as a bit, but I don't know how much that actually matters. Do you have anything you want to plug? You got any papers you want people to read? Do you want to plug your stream, anything like that?
um
Plug your podcast that you guys don't do anymore?
well if I had really uh I don't think I'll plug my papers. I don't think I want to as much as I'd like to, crank those article views up. But I will plug my podcast, which I don't know, might be coming back soon in some form, or that's at least the feed where if I announce some other project, that's where it'll show up. I have this podcast about community, and also just about like life and chatting with my friend, called Dom and Andre in the morning. She'll hopefully be starting back up soon, but there's like a 50 episode backlog. If you wanna check that out on all your podcast platforms. Or we also own www.dominandre.com.
You want to plug your stream too? I mean, I guess you don't do that, but you could.
Oh yeah, I mean yeah. Sometimes I stream on twitch.tv/ those guys Dom. I'd like to get more consistent about it. I've been meaning to play a playthrough of Outer Worlds pretty soon here.
Outer
Um,
Worlds or Outer Wilds?
Outer Worlds.
Why?
Uh, it looks cool. I like um God, why am I forgetting the
Obsidian.
oh yeah, it is Obsidian. I was gonna say why did Obsidian not sound right to me? Um yeah, yeah, Obsidian's tight. But yeah, so twitch.tv/ those guys Dom. There's also like some stuff on YouTube, those guys Dom. Um just a couple of things, but hopefully I'll get more. I'm trying to make a conscious effort to get more consistent about doing some creating once I'm through. I'm actually in a huge cycle of writing things right now. Um, but hopefully I will be creating more soon.
Yeah, I know that feel. Trying to get back to a thing when a new thing has pulled you away from it, or
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, this was fun. By nature of this podcast, I have it set up that people are welcome to return whenever, because you just need to have something you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I've got more ideas.
Yeah, and it can be, I don't know. People have gone pretty general so far, but like I know not everybody. It'll be like everybody's jam. I love doing like hyper specific weird episodes. Like if someone messaged me like, "Hey, I want to talk about this one specific game or movie, and I just want to talk about this because it's on my mind," I would absolutely do that, and I could probably talk
See,
about
this
it for
is
2 hours.
yeah, I mean, I have when you put it that way, I have even more ideas because you haven't been exposed to sort of some of my greatest hits in terms of movies that really piss me off, or like,
Yeah.
movies that I'm really obsessed with.
Yeah, and so like it's definitely a thing of like also you can just like shop around ideas, and if there is preparation I need to do for a thing, the further out you let me know, I can get that done. I have a lot
All
of
right.
free time and I can consume media quite
I
quickly.
do love the podcast format of one guy with a bunch of research to bring to the table and one guy who reacts to that research.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, it shifts a little bit, but always my goal is like I want the person to be coming on to be like talking to me about something they care about and like teaching me in some capacity, I guess.
Yeah.
Is the goal, and like sometimes that works better than others. Like the second episode was about trophy hunting. There wasn't anything I needed to learn there, but like we went back and forth about our experience with various games and like challenges we completed and stuff like that, and like it was just fun to talk about that for 2 hours.
Yeah.
um yeah, can always return. I genuinely want to try to do this weekly. um i I made the mistake of starting this when I'm about to go out of town for like a month.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna immediately lose the weekly streak, but hopefully when I get back. Oh,
Yeah, it's tough once you I feel like once you miss one, it's a slippery slope.
yeah, I'll try to be good about it. I mean, I still do a weekly podcast with my cousins, so we've been like,
Oh.
other than when I'm out of town or like one of us is like
What is
busy with
this
school.
called?
This one,
Oh.
this one is called. I was just calling it like and me podcast because I've been changing the introduction. I say the name of the other person
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
a very self-deprecating way of like this podcast is not about me; it's about whoever's on.
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I'll put the links to the stuff you shout out in the description. I can also send you a link to the episode once it's up. Go
All
from
right.
there. But yeah, thanks for watching or listening, whatever the case may be. Um, Probably next time you're on, you won't be a shadow demon.
No, no, I don't think so.
I don't think you need to hide who
But
you are when you talk
maybe
about the
I'll just
Sonic
stay like
Cinematic
this.
Universe.
Maybe I'll work on this even more and
This will
make
be
it
your
look
identity.
even more fucked up. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you next.
Yep. Thanks for having me.